So we have two new images from you. The first one is these two glasses, and it's this like back and forth yin and yang that you have, right? So you have one side that's a darker glass, really solid. We can't see into it, and coming out of it are these skulls and this dark smoke coming out of it. And then in the other glass, it's bright pink and it's cheery and it has a heart on it. And coming out of it is this red light smoke coming out of it. So it has very different feels to it. And we can go back and forth and have kind of the back and forth or the yin and yang between the two of them. Now, when I look at these images a little bit closer, as we look here, we can see a lot of reflection on that cup, right? You don't notice that as much on the metal cup, but here we see the umbrella, we see maybe a softbox here, we see, I'm not sure, maybe another umbrella or something down here at the bottom. So we're seeing a lot of reflection, and that's a bit of a distraction for me as I'm viewing the image. Also, as I have this larger, I notice the selection on this side of the cup, that doesn't look very smooth there. And that's something that, unfortunately, as I'm looking at your portfolios this semester, I'm not probably going to be able to notice because you're printing them and then videotaping them at home. Videotaping them, geez. You're filming them, you're recording them at home. And I won't be able to see the quality of the digital image quite as well as I normally can. Normally I'm looking really close at those images before I do my portfolio review. So I want to make sure I catch these errors before you go to print so that when you have your final portfolio, it's of as high as quality as possible. So paying attention to that edge, I notice it a little bit up here as well. I think it's the brighter parts of the cup that your selection just wasn't fully capturing. So cleaning that up a little bit. And then what happens with some of these images, and I'm noticing this especially from last week's image that you had here, is that you're just putting them on a plain background. So then they start to look really artificial. Then it doesn't look as though this is an actual scene, right? So having an actual background that you're putting them on that has dimension to it, instead of being flat, instead of flattening it out, is going to add to our understanding of that and add to the reality of it. And we see that a little bit more in some of your other images. I'm always going back to this image of the perfume. And as you've created the shadow back and you've added dimension as this is floating away, it feels more realistic. Let's see, I thought I was looking at a different image earlier. Yeah, here working with the mirror on the ground, that creates that dimension, so it looks more realistic. So that's what I want you to really work on, is adding that dimension to the background piece so that these don't look as though they've been placed on a flat background, but the background has more dimension to that. And we have it a little bit more here as we're looking at this background and you've created the shadow on it. That alone adds to that understanding of this being three-dimensional and not being flat. So that helps with it. Even this like bend that you have right here, because if you were pulling down a backdrop, you'd have a little bit of that, even though we try so hard to get rid of it. That grounds us in a little bit more reality here that I think helps the believability of your image. So I would encourage you to have more shadows, bring that in more, have the actual backgrounds that you're shooting, that you're adding your subjects to, instead of just pulling backgrounds or patterns that aren't as realistic, right? Even with this image, we can tell that this is just sitting there and added to the background because it's just hanging in space, but there's something more believable about it with those shadows that you added. And then, as I had talked about, like less believable as the shadows don't totally line up with one another. So those shadows really do add a big change to this. So for this image, you have a little tea kettle with some smoke coming out. There's a weird line happening right in here that you're going to want to fix. And then you have Aladdin coming out. And that Aladdin is so realistic, right? It's a cartoon, but realistic for the cartoon, that it feels like it's just pasted on there. I think just by lowering the opacity of the Aladdin, I think that would help a lot. I think then it's going to feel more like that smoke that you've also added. Maybe even adding some of that smoke in front of him will make it more dimensional and will make it more believable. And I understand that there's like this play, like your images are fake, right? You're okay with that. That's part of what you're doing. That's part of the fun of what you're doing, is you're able to create these scenes. But you still do want us to kind of be tricked into the reality of the scene and buying into it and feeling like it is visually cohesive. So that's where you're going to benefit from kind of lowering the opacity, making him feel a little bit more of a genie coming out of a bottle. There's also a little bit of weird Photoshop happening, I think, right around the edge here, where we have some dots that are darker. That feels a little bit off from what we're seeing, so around it. So that's one other thing I'd like for you to update there. It's actually, since I did it for the other image, I haven't been doing this for your images. Just looking at that selection on the edge. A little bit rough right in there. Yeah, but otherwise it looks fine. Okay, cool. All right, let me know if you have any questions, Ashley. Hopefully that gives you a little bit more guidance on how to edit these images.